Hello, my name is Miranda Limonczenko. I am a senior technical writer at VMware and a front-end web developer. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about web accessibility, why it matters, of course, and basically my experience building a website for Guide Dogs for the Blind with a team, and also what we did for web accessibility. So let's get right into it. Okay, so why web accessibility? Really, it's in the name, access. Web accessibility really allows anyone to use web apps and software without any restriction. And if you think about it, it's vitally important because of how much we rely on software. Our ability to work and learn and live depends on our ability to use software and web apps. So when we build sites that are not accessible, even though we have all of the tools to make it accessible, we're excluding people from a job or from an education or from a product. And this is why there is such a good case for lawsuits. But today I don't want to talk about lawsuits. I really want to talk about the positive side of web accessibility, which is really about creating experiences for users, which is why it was so exciting to work for Guide Dogs for the Blind building their website. Our goal for building their website was to create a delightful experience for those who are blind and visually impaired. And if you think about it, people going to the site, maybe people who just recently had an injury, who may have been suffering for years. So even creating a delightful experience on the site is offering some sort of relief and comfort, and hopefully they'll seek out services. So that was our goal for that user group. And now I'm going to talk to you about some things that we focused on. Not all of them, because I only have 15 minutes, but some of the things we focused on to create a delightful experience for the blind and visually impaired. We broke it up into two user groups, the visually impaired, so we focused on them for high color contrast, dramatic hoverstates, and an option to raise contrast and text size, among many other things, but we're focusing on these today. For the blind, this is people who are maybe using screen reader software, so they're listening to a HTML document being read. For them, we focused on menu architecture, elements grounding them in context, and alt text to enrich the experience with images. So for each of these, for the visually impaired, we're going to walk through all of them. High color contrast. With high color contrast, we used a tool, this contrast tool, which was fantastic, and we tested all of our brand colors, black text and white text on top of all the brand colors. I recommend that anyone do this. So some things we discovered, basically we had it in a spreadsheet, all of our colors. We discovered that white text worked best on the brand color pink, but also all the other brand colors, black text worked best. So for me as a web developer, it was important for me to remember this, and in every situation to make an exception for pink background, to have white text on that pink background. That in this case, there is an exception instead of trying to have consistency with text on brand colors. But we also learned that black text on orange, which is another brand color, is better contrast than white text, even though visually, to some of us, it felt like it was higher contrast. It's important to keep in mind color blindness and other things, which is why it's valuable to have something like software to help you, because visually you may see contrast when actually the contrast can be different for different people. Highly recommend doing this. Another thing we focused on was dramatic hoverstates. This one's not that intuitive for a lot of people. It's definitely something that we all need to learn, myself included. And this is true not just for hoverstates, but just for diagrams or for other things. Color should not be the only indicator for a change. This is true for status updates or anything. Just changing something from green to orange to red as status indicators should not be the only indicator. There should be some other visual indicator. So this can be movement, And this can just be an icon or an outline or just something visually different that is not color based. I have a couple of examples here. Here's one of them. You can see that there's the white on pink and the black on orange. So for the before you hover, it's just a pink background and white text. And then after you hover, the text color changes, the background color changes, and there's a border around there. So if you imagine that if the color difference is not there, then you can still see that there's a difference. But also, I think that it is important to note that it really does look beautiful, this hover state. When we think of hover states, so often the trend, I think, is to show slightly less opacity or to go from black to a gray. And even though it may seem like these subtleties are good, like beautiful, it really is also beautiful to have high color contrast, and it serves more people. Here's another example. So here the color changes, but also on the icon the negative flips around so that the arrow is colored in, and so the dot disappears. Visually it looks different. It also kind of looks like the arrow is more to the right, but I think it's an optical illusion. And finally, I say it's a bonus, but we added a toolbar to raise contrast and text size. This was something that we did because we wanted to show that we really valued people coming to the site. We know that there are people who use software like Zoom software, or they use a Zoom software to zoom in on the site, or they use contrast software. But for people who don't have the software or don't know about it, we wanted to give them this option to raise contrast and text size across the site, and that will stay saved so that every time they look at the site, it is configured to their settings. So here it is expanded. It's black on orange. You can change it to black on orange on black, black on white, and white on black. You can also change the text size to increase. I had feedback from one of the users, which was really great. She used Zoom software and color contrast software, but when she was using the site, she said, "Wow, this site is so beautiful. I don't need my software. I would look at it as is," and it just made me so happy. I loved it so much. That feedback. All right, so gonna change gears a little bit and talk about screen reader software and what we did for the blind. So this is people who primarily use screen reader software, and now they can still be looking at the site when they're using screen reader software, but primarily they're relying on the screen reader software. One thing we focused on, which was huge, was the menu architecture. So this is something that maybe a lot of us don't think about, but the main body of the page is normally the thing that stands out to a sighted user. There's advertisements, there's call to actions, there's all this stuff. But when you're using a screen reader, what you experience first is the menu architecture. And a lot of the time you may not even get to the body. If you hear the place that you want to go, then you'll just click on that and not even get to the main body or know what's there. So it's extremely important to focus on the experience of the main menu architecture. We did research for this. We used a tool called Optimal Sort. We were able to take content, put them on a bunch of cards, and then send them out to various users, like our own team, like the marketing team at Guide Dogs for the Blind, and like various users, and have them group them into buckets. Funny story, I felt like I did a great job. I felt like when I organized the content, it was perfect. And then when I saw all of the data of how other people organized it, I was definitely an outlier. Other people see things differently, and really it's based on their experiences that they group content differently than you, which is why it's so valuable to have data like this to organize your content. We ended up putting prospective students into a menu that was called Get a Guide Dog. So next thing, we focused on elements and grounding them in context. This is something that is also important. Everything is so important. But with this, I think it's so important for a web developer to use screen reader software. For Mac, it's VoiceOver software built in, and just navigate a page and learn how to navigate with a keyboard so that you can experience your web app and optimize it. One of the things you can do with screen reader software is jump from header to header to header, or jump from link to link to link. And so when you do that, these things are read out of the context of where they are. Like, they're not read with the paragraph in mind. So you might hear, click here, or click here for this article. And you go, what article? What's here? And you don't know. So when you have links, they should say where they're going as a general rule. But if you don't want to do that, or if it doesn't make sense visually, then you can add an ARIA label, which will override what is being read. So I have an example here with an anchor. It doesn't have an href, but you know what I mean. The ARIA label says you're currently on page 1 when the actual text just shows 1. So what will be read aloud is link 1, something like that, if there is no ARIA label. I also have a similar example here. I don't know why it's highlighting page 2, but here is a blog post that's saying the ARIA label is current page, page 1. And here you can also see read blog post. That is being linked to. Another way to add more context is to override that with an ARIA label that says read blog post guide dogs for the blind, puzzles and games for kids. Last thing we focused on in this presentation anyway is that images enrich the experience with alt text. Alt text is something I'm really passionate about because it's so easy to get wrong. I am telling you, there were so many times where I have seen diagram about ABC, whatever, but it doesn't say what is in the diagram. So it's entirely leaving out the information that people need to learn. So it's so important, really, just as a rule, to have empathy, to imagine what the intent of the image is, and fully deliver on that intent. Also, context does matter. So if that exact same information is redundant, then you don't have to repeat it. There is a great example just right here. Context is everything. I love this article that talks about alt text. It has quizzes in it, and I have a screenshot of one of the quizzes. What should this alt text be? You can see that there's an image of George Washington and that there's a paragraph of text. So the correct answer would be George Washington. A doesn't work because you don't need to say image of. Since the screen reader software knows it's an image, it will say it's an image. You don't have to say it's the first president of the United States because the paragraph already says that. But there is value in saying that it's an image of George Washington. So George Washington, D, is the correct answer. Here's another example from the Guide Dogs website. So with Guide Dogs for the Blind, there's hero images all over the site. They're beautiful and they take up most of the page. So me, originally, I thought, well, the alt text should be left blank because they're decorative. The intent really is that they're not adding any value, that they're just supposed to be visually appealing. So they're just decorative, so they should be left blank. But I got the feedback from users that they could see that there was this big, colorful, beautiful image taking up the majority of the page, but they couldn't see what the image was. So they felt left out. We ended up going through the site and adding alt text to all of the big hero images. So here's an example of one. It says a female Guide Dogs for the Blind graduate hikes along a trail with her black lab guide dog next to her. All right, so we covered all of the things. We covered high color contrast, dramatic hover states, contrast, the contrast toolbar. We talked about architecture, context, and we talked about alt text. Really, I just wanted to emphasize how much fun it was to build a good site for users. It really helped me see that web accessibility is just good design, it's just good development, and it should be at the heart of everything we do because it's all about being empathetic and curious and building the best experiences for users. And that is all. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. And if you want to, see more of me or hang out with me, I post blog posts at my site, which is booksoncode.com. And I look forward to seeing you there if you're interested in that. And I hope that you enjoy all of the other presentations. Thank you so much.